think about, the future, the sort of highly dense, model is just a much better model in terms of having low emissions than the American Atlanta sprawling model involving very large houses and very large cars and lots of commutes. And I guess I want to end that there, which is not only do I think that sort of cities are incredibly important for the economy and economic change and culture and politics, they also are important for the environment. It may well be that the most important environmental battles of the 21st century will be fought around urban development in India and China. So I think that's another reason why I'm glad to be here and have the opportunity to learn from you. So let me end there.
Since need no introduction to this audience. Ramesh Ramanathan's founder of Janagray, Abhijit Banerjee, professor of economics at MIT and director of the enormously influential Poverty Action Lab, and Partha Mukhopadhyay is senior fellow at Center for Policy Research. So I'll just invite perhaps Abhijit to begin, and then Ramesh.
That's a hard act to follow, so I'm going to not even try. I guess I was trying to, as I was listening to Ed, I had not read his slides, so I was trying to think of how the sort of picture that he painted, I think, which is extremely relevant to India. I think especially the point that India, I think, and this is something I've convinced of many years ago without having read its work, just having to take a bus in Calcutta convinced me that the high density would be a good thing, and I have never understood the logic of low density in India, especially given the government's inability to provide any other form of infrastructure. It seems like it's a good thing to have. On the urbanization question, so it seems to me that there's sort of there's one ingredient which I think Ed mentioned fleetingly at the end, which I think is actually probably quite important, especially in thinking about this in the context of India, which is the quality of life. And in some ways, I feel that if you look at the Indian, I've been doing some surveying of the Indian urban poor, and one thing that comes out, which is very striking in India, is especially, and this is less true in Delhi, which is probably one of the hubs for people who migrate for a length of time. If you look at migrants in, let's say, let me take Meerut. What's striking about that is how many of those people are actually short-term migrants. One of the most striking facts that we did a survey, not at all thinking about this issue, of rural Udaipur district. Now, I don't know if you've been to rural Udaipur district, but rural Udaipur district is sort of classic, Sylvan India or whatever. It's not, there's really not much there. It's people, it's one of the places which had the lowest female literacy rates of India. It was 2%, I think, among the tribal people in 1991. So it's quote unquote backward. Now, what was striking about the survey, and something that we never anticipated, was the fraction of people who said, we get more than the majority of our income from outside the village. And this number was, in different parts, over 75%. So these were people who were living. Now, what makes it even more striking is that almost everybody, 97% of our people of sample, own some land. So these are people who are all landowners. A very large fraction of them get the income from outside their village. What do? Typical strategies, they go to some small town, in this particular instance, not Meerut, because Meerut is not in Udaipur district, but like a town like Kherwara, which you haven't heard of for the right reason. It's not a particularly pleasant place. And work in either in restaurants, construction, sometimes in just maintenance, cleaning the trucks. And the median length of a migration round trip is 18 days. So they go for 18 days to the city, they stay somewhere, and they go back. And I mean, one of the central puzzles of Indian urbanization, which for a long time was that why isn't India urbanizing? And now I think you hear much more sort of I think there's some reason we have convinced ourselves that this has changed. But my sense of it is still that a lot of what's changed is this bit of it. That what's really changed is the fraction of people who are now round tripping into the city. That's a big change over the last 10 to 15 years. And that's true pretty much. I mean, I've looked at this in UP, in West Bengal, and Rajasthan, and you see the same pattern, which is very short-term migration to nearby cities. And the interesting question, the policy question of great interest is, why is this short-term? And why do we, let me start by backing up and saying, why do we care? Well, one reason we care, and this goes back to, I think, this is a reinterpretation of Ed's point that cities are a good place to learn, is that actually one of the, I think, biggest single failures of the Indian state is providing adequate learning opportunities in rural India. And so one of the, I would say, externalities, one of the spillovers from the urbanization process is actually when parents move to cities, children actually get the opportunity to go to schools. Now, what I think is interesting is how much of that's internalized. How much do parents strategize to actually find good schools for their children? Do they move to cities? And I think some parents do, but I think on the whole, this round tripping is suggesting, and we ask them why they round trip, and we haven't got, this is a new survey we're doing. My impression, a lot of it is quality of life, that they feel that living in the village is nicer. And this comes to, and I think that comes to a fact that I think most of us have noticed, which is living as a poor person in an Indian city is not very nice. And the quality of life is horrible. And I think a lot of that's just the nature of our land use regulation, the way we have, but also, I mean, this, for example, in Delhi, a lot of the slums are illegal. And what does illegal mean? Illegal means that you're not actually entitled to any infrastructure. Or that's not quite true. There's difference between power, which you're actually somehow entitled to, and water you're not entitled to. And what happens, if you don't have water, how do you live? Well, you do it illegally. What do you mean? You mean that you get some plumber to basically connect a set of pipes to the central mains that's going along the road, and then you pull some water out of it. Now, the reason why that's not as good as getting real water connection is that sometimes people come and cut it off. And because I was in a slum in South Delhi the other day, and they were saying, well, this pipe goes to Vasant Vihar, which is a posh neighborhood of Delhi with lots of retired bureaucrats who can complain. So, they complain. From time to time they complain. Whenever they complain, the Jal Board, which is the water authority, come and cuts off the connection, and then you, for a few days, you have no water. Then again you call your legislator, and he calls the Jal Board, and there's some negotiation, all illegal or extra legal, and then at some point you pay the plumber again to again make a hole into the mains and connect it. But this whole process means that this is just an example of how the strategies the poor need to adapt to survive. And this makes for an extraordinarily, I think, a low quality of life, which I think is very correlated with, I think the incomes are higher, the opportunities are higher, the opportunities for the children are better. But I think on the other hand, living in a village is just pleasanter. In many parts of India, you have you have a community, you just have a house, for example. You know, it's still true that the highland, you know, typically in Rajasthan, for example, there are pieces of highland which are not cultivable, and there you can have a perfectly pleasant house to live in, where even if you're very poor, your house has 3 rooms, and that's quite common actually. And so, my sense of it is that one of the margins I think we need to think about in India is if we, I think we are right now, the fiction that we go through is that we are going to provide services to the poor in rural areas, and therefore we will retain the population there, and they're going to have, you know, they're going to get services there, and we'll have some equilibrium with relatively low levels of urbanization. I think what false about that fiction